actually doing something to make a difference as a community. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm interested in, is like, how can trans people be more than just kind of token objects around which we talk about the issue of gender.
And so, if we wanted to give our listeners some sort of action item, obviously there's all sorts of things that need to be addressed and all sorts of things to be done. But is there a particular organization that they should donate to, or a particular bill that people should be watching for and calling representatives about? Is there something sort of tangible that we can give people to think about doing, at least in the immediate future?
Yeah, I want to say two things about that. One, I would say, is find out whether there are some trans children being picked on in your local school district.
Hmm.
Because that is an issue that's playing out in all these local communities where, you have these adults sort of insisting that transphobia be enforced on these children. And I sometimes it's hard to find out from reading a news article about it or whatever, like what the children think and what the children need who are at the middle of these debates. But that's something that I would just love for people to do, is like remember that those children, again, aren't token objects of a debate. They are actual people. And chances are it would mean a lot for them to like receive your support, even if just verbally, to say
Hmm.
like, I see you as a person who deserves to be able to use a bathroom and not be harassed. I think that's a really, really, really big deal, and a thing that it can be very meaningful not to stand on the sidelines about. The other thing I would say is an organization that I wanted to mention. Scalawag just published a profile about called Southerners on New Ground, which has been around for it's 25 years now. It's an LGBTQ people of color run organization focused on the South and kind of working across some of these intersectional issues in terms of how incarceration and transphobia overlap, how race and sexuality overlap, and how people living at those intersections are particularly likely to become the targets of violence, whether that's violence that is sanctioned by governments or police, or private violence. And song has really been at the forefront of both making those connections and organizing around those issues for a long time. So that's a great organization to look to.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that people know or are thinking about around this issue?
I think sometimes just the existence of trans people, when people first start starting to think about it, it brings up all these big questions, right, around gender and what you've maybe thought to be real or true in the past, right? That trans people can be the thing that sort of changes that for people. And the recommendation that I end up giving often, because we live in the internet age and it's wonderful, is like, it's totally fine and great to ask questions, but just like Google it first and make sure that you can't get it answered that way. The number of times that I've just as a human, like fielded questions that it's just like that are just, why don't you just Google it level questions, is hilarious. So, like, I'm all for the curiosity and the questioning, and it can be really overwhelming. And there's a lot of bad stuff on the internet, but there's a lot of really great stuff too, to answer people's like basic questions about trans issues and trans people and definitions and all that kind of things. And I think I would love to just see more of that sort of like healthy and empowered curiosity about us in the general population. I think a lot of times what we end up seeing is either reflexive sort of defensiveness, like I'm not comfortable with these people, and so I'm not comfortable with anything about it, or a sort of presumed allyship, that is like, oh yeah, well of course I support this, but that too can come from a place of not being well informed. So healthy curiosity, that's the thing that I encourage around this.
Yeah, I will admit that I got myself all caught up in this. Recently, I was going to do just a giveaway on Twitter, and I wanted people to say who their favorite women running for office were, and I got so caught up in my own head about what I meant by women and who all that included and how to be very clear about that. And I ended up just saying, tell me your favorite candidates. And then I got a bunch of, answers about straight white men. And I was like, well, that wasn't at all what I was going for. And so I regretted that and wished that I had just sort of admitted my own ignorance and been like, what I mean is, all of these communities.
That's such a good anecdote. I love that one because that's like one of the fears of sort of anti-trans second wave feminists is that, trans politics means the end of women and that we don't get to talk about women's issues anymore. But of course we do because they're, trans women are also women. So it's actually sometimes it's simpler than you think it's going to be.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been super informative for me. And I think that this is an issue that, it's not something that stays at the forefront of my mind all of the time. And I want it to in a bigger way. So I'm very grateful to you for talking to us about these issues.
Thanks, Kelly.
Welcome back to our next segment of Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm Sophie again, and I'm here with Kelly. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, everybody.
And joining us for this segment is Susan Maasch, who is the director of Trans Youth Equality Foundation. We're so happy to have you with us, Susan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about Trans Youth Equality, what sorts of work that you do there?
Trans Youth Equality is an advocacy organization. We began in 2007. I'm one of the founders, and we began at a time when there was literally nothing out there, hardly anything out there in terms of support for transgender children. There certainly were a regionally known place in Cleveland that supported trans parents and one on the West Coast. But generally, there wasn't much information or resources. And certainly there were very few advocates out there for transgender children and their families. So when we realized that, we decided to just start this foundation, which very quickly became a national foundation. And we advocate for transgender children with their families, with their parents, with educators and their providers, and wherever the need is. We use social media very aggressively to really reach out about the important issues, the current issues, everything across the board, a broad range of issues that could be of help to parents and youth as well. And our audience on social media is parents, youth, educators, and providers. But predominantly, we're speaking to the youth and their families. We have a summer and fall camp, which supports transgender youth from ages 6 to 18. And support groups regionally. We train people to open support groups where they live so that we can help to meet the need, especially in underserved areas of the country. And we train schools, we train physicians in terms of, sensitivity with their trans youth clients. I mean, we do such a range of work here, especially starting at a time when there wasn't much out there. We really built our model on widely, filling a lot of different needs. So a lot of what we do is, in terms of advocacy, is take calls and emails and contacts from youth that are everywhere, all over the country, in Puerto Rico and out of the country, other countries, and just respond the best way we can to give them support, to make suggestions to them. Often they're asking us questions like, I'm scared to come out to my parents, what should I do? And all kinds of questions, so that not all youth or parents are learning just everything on the internet, that they can speak to a voice of experience and with our collective wisdom, from our collective experience, that we can really help parents and youth directly. So what we do is try to keep resources like from every area of the country, so that if a kid anywhere needed something, we could, help them out, but also direct them to local and regional resources.
How many kids or how many families do you think you serve in a given year?
Well, it certainly grows every year, of course, and more kids and families coming out. In 2017, I know that number's fresh in my head because I was recently told that we served a little over 2,600 kids.
Wow.
So, and serving them means any of the above that we just talked about, whether they attended our camps, called us for some type of resource or advocacy, speaking to schools on their behalf, any of the range of the work that we do, will add to that number. So it does climb every year. I couldn't even tell you, probably thinking back all those, a decade ago, how many children we served in that first year or two. I'll tell you, it grew quickly, very quickly. So I always say that my role in that was one of the reasons it grew so quickly, that probably you can relate to even the work that you do is trying to spread the word. It's sort of about marketing. I came from a fine art background. I'm an art curator, and I had to learn a lot about art marketing over the years in my career. And I just sort of used, some of that marketing background to make sure that we, just sort of aggressively made sure that kids and parents could find us, at a time when they could have been coming from anywhere because there were no local resources. That's how we got started.
And how is youth defined? Is that through age 18?
For us, it is through age 18. And the kids that do age out, and some of them, if you can imagine, have been with us most of their lives, we, when they age out, we still kind of meet with them and listen and advocate with them. We encourage them to find local resources for people either in college or that are, adult type support groups in their areas. But we, so it's not like they magically turn 18 and we let them go.
Mm-hmm.
If they reach out to us and, we've been their advocates, we stick with them. But generally speaking, if anybody over 18 contacts us that we don't know and haven't dealt with, we generally will just help them find some good resources where they are.
You often get from trans youth about how to come out to their families. What sorts of questions do you get from the families?
Well, when the families contact us, I have to say they're anxious for any information. They're nervous. They're usually a little bit frightened. That's, what they express is an anxiety over what they're supposed to do, what they should do, how to ascertain. A lot of them are afraid, about how to ascertain that their children really mean it, because often they'll think it's a phase or they're misreading what's going on with them. So we walk them through that whole episode. And we, so the people that contact us, for the most part, I have seen everything, but for the most part, they're contacting us because they're looking for support for themselves and their children, as opposed to, the many parents who reject. If we make the initial call to the parent, if a child asks us to or school asks us to, and the parent's not ready, unwilling to listen, or they think that somehow they can will away their child's gender identity issues, that they, they're not always receptive. And, we've been called names, like extremists, and parents that simply are very hard and seemingly uneducable, but some do come around. And we always tell the kids that parents that seem absolutely like they will never come around often will come around. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, we've been trained over the years to come down hard if we have to, in a very honest and open and compassionate way with parents, to let them know that if they don't follow the guidelines of organizations like our own or affirming organizations or the American, Academy of Pediatrics guidelines or the Endocrine Society guidelines, that perhaps it's going to go dark before it gets any better. And we try to explain that the best way we can. And we've learned the hard way over the years, as you can imagine, because that's exactly what does happen. If you ignore the needs of a transgender child, things are going to go dark before they get better if you don't support in some way, listen, support, show some compassion, show unconditional love. You're going to, things will start turning. So we'll often have parents that are really resistant, contacting us again, or, coming around somehow.
How did you get involved in this work?
Well, for myself, I had transgender